The sound of mortar shells echoed through the valley as Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun crouched behind a boulder, her uniform soaked in sweat and blood that wasn't her own. 12 Marines lay scattered around her, some unconscious, others barely clinging to consciousness. The enemy had found their position, and extraction was still hours away. According to every military manual, every tactical doctrine she'd ever studied, their situation was hopeless. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and trapped in hostile territory with no backup coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But Sarah Chun had never been one to follow conventional wisdom. The same Marines who had spent months calling her too soft, too gentle, too emotional for real combat, were now looking at her with desperate hope in their eyes. They needed someone to lead them through 15 miles of enemy-controlled wilderness, someone who could think beyond the standard playbook, someone who understood that sometimes the gentlest approach was actually the strongest at what happened next would forever change. How the Marine Corps viewed strength, leadership, and what it truly meant to leave no one behind. The morning reveille at Camp Pendleton cut through the California air at exactly 0500 hours, but Sarah Chun had been awake for 30 minutes already. She sat on the edge of her bunk in the women's barracks, carefully reading a letter from her younger brother Michael, who was struggling with depression back home in Portland. The letter was filled with the kind of pain that couldn't be solved with military precision or combat training, the kind that required patience, understanding, and a gentle hand. Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it in her footlocker, alongside dozens of others from family members, fellow Marines, and even some of the local civilians she'd befriended during community outreach programs. Writing letters had become her evening ritual, a way to connect with people beyond the rigid structure of military life. Her bunkmate, Corporal Lisa Reynolds, often joked that Sarah ran an unofficial counseling service from their barracks room. "Chun, you're gonna miss chow if you don't move," Reynolds called out, already dressed and ready for the day. Sarah nodded, quickly pulling on her utilities and checking her appearance in the small mirror above her locker. At 26, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that some mistook for weakness. Her voice was soft-spoken, her movements deliberate rather than aggressive, and she had a habit of listening more than she spoke. The mess hall buzzed with the usual morning energy as Marines prepared for another day of training. Sarah carried her tray to a table near the windows, where she could watch the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. She'd grown up in Oregon's forests, and the California landscape reminded her of home in ways that brought both comfort and homesickness. "Mind if I sit?" The voice belonged to Private First Class Tony Rodriguez, a 19-year-old from Texas who'd been struggling with the transition to military life. Sarah gestured to the empty chair across from her, noting the dark circles under his eyes that suggested another sleepless night. "How's your mom doing?" Sarah asked, remembering their previous conversation about his mother's battle with cancer. Rodriguez's face brightened slightly at the question, surprised that she'd remembered such a personal detail. "Better, actually. The new treatment is working. Thanks for asking, Sergeant." He hesitated, then continued. "I wanted to thank you for what you said last week about writing to her more often. I took your advice, and she said my letters have been helping her get through the tough days." Sarah smiled genuinely. "Family connection is important, especially when we're far from home. It gives us something to fight for beyond ourselves." Rodriguez nodded and began eating with more enthusiasm than Sarah had seen from him in weeks. These small moments of human connection were what drew her to the military, not the promise of combat or the thrill of warfare. After breakfast, Sarah made her way to the administrative building where she served as the company's family readiness group coordinator. The position wasn't glamorous, involving endless paperwork, phone calls with worried spouses, and organizing support networks for military families. It was also a role that many of her male counterparts viewed as beneath their pay grade, something better suited to civilian employees or Marines who weren't cut out for real military work. Her office was small but efficiently organized, with filing cabinets containing detailed records of every family in the company. Sarah had created a comprehensive system for tracking family emergencies, financial hardships, and personal crises that might affect a Marine's readiness and performance. On her desk sat a thick folder marked priority cases containing situations that required immediate attention and careful handling. The first call of the day came from Jennifer Walsh, whose husband, Sergeant David Walsh, was deployed with the company's advance team. Jennifer was 8 months pregnant with their second child and experiencing complications that might require bed rest. Sarah listened carefully as Jennifer explained her fears about managing their toddler alone while dealing with potential medical issues. "Mrs. Walsh, I understand how overwhelming this must feel," Sarah said, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that immediately put people at ease. "Let me connect you with our spouse support network in your area." Maria Gonzalez went through a similar situation last year, and she's volunteered to help other families facing pregnancy complications. "I'll also coordinate with the Red Cross to ensure your husband receives notification about your medical situation." The conversation lasted 20 minutes, during which Sarah arranged for childcare assistance, medical support coordination, and emotional counseling resources. By the time she hung up, Jennifer Walsh was crying with relief rather than fear. These were the victories that mattered to Sarah, the moments when her gentle approach and attention to detail made a real difference in people's lives. Her next task involved reviewing the files of Marines who had been flagged for potential personal issues. Corporal James Peterson had been showing signs of financial stress, with multiple requests for pay advances and visible anxiety during formations. Private Marcus Thompson had been receiving concerning reports from his wife about their son's behavioral problems at school. Lance Corporal Kevin Brooks was dealing with his father's terminal illness and trying to balance military duties with family obligations. Sarah made detailed notes about each case, planning follow-up conversations and identifying resources that might help. She'd learned that most behavioral issues in military units stemmed from unresolved personal problems rather than lack of military competence. A Marine who was worried about his family's financial security couldn't focus properly during training. A soldier dealing with relationship problems at home became distracted and potentially dangerous during live-fire exercises. Her approach was methodical and compassionate, treating each Marine as a complete person rather than just a cog in the military machine. She'd developed relationships with financial counselors, marriage therapists, educational advisors, and medical professionals throughout the San Diego area, creating an informal network of support that extended far beyond traditional military resources. Around 1,000 hours, Sarah received a call that made her stomach drop. Sergeant Walsh, the deployed Marine whose wife she'd spoken with earlier, had been injured during a patrol in Afghanistan. The injury wasn't life-threatening, but it would require medical evacuation and potentially months of recovery. Sarah immediately began the complex process of coordinating family notification, medical updates, and logistical support. She spent the next hour on conference calls with military hospitals, Red Cross representatives, and family liaison officers, ensuring that Jennifer Walsh received accurate, timely information about her husband's condition. Sarah also arranged for emergency childcare and transportation to the military hospital where Sergeant Walsh would be transferred upon his return to the United States. These were the moments when Sarah's attention to detail and comprehensive preparation proved invaluable. While other administrators might have simply processed the paperwork and made the required notifications, Sarah understood that behind every casualty report was a family whose world had just been turned upside down. Her gentle approach didn't mean she was weak or ineffective. It meant she was thorough, thoughtful, and genuinely committed to taking care of people when they needed it most. During lunch, Sarah typically ate alone or with one or two Marines who sought her out for advice or conversation. She carried a small notebook where she jotted down reminders about personal situations, upcoming anniversaries that might be difficult for separated families, and ideas for improving support services. Other Marines often noticed her writing and assumed she was working on administrative tasks, unaware that she was actually maintaining detailed intelligence about the human elements that kept their unit functioning effectively. The afternoon brought a different kind of challenge when Captain Robert Hayes, the company commander, called Sarah into his office for what he termed a performance discussion. Captain Hayes was a decorated combat veteran who'd earned his position through aggressive leadership and tactical excellence. He represented everything the Marine Corps traditionally valued: physical strength, decisive action, and unwavering focus on mission accomplishment. "Sergeant Chen," Hayes began, settling behind his desk with Sarah's personnel file open before him. "Your administrative work has been exceptional, and the feedback from families has been overwhelmingly positive. However, I'm concerned about your career trajectory and whether you're maximizing your potential as a Marine." Sarah sat at attention, though she felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. She'd had variations of this conversation multiple times throughout her career, always with well-meaning superiors who couldn't understand why she seemed content with roles that didn't involve direct combat operations. "Sir, I believe my current position allows me to contribute significantly to unit readiness and morale," Sarah replied carefully. "Supporting military families directly impacts operational effectiveness." Hayes nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "That's true, Sergeant, but the Marine Corps needs leaders who can excel in all aspects of military operations. Combat leadership experience is essential for advancement, and frankly, some of your peers have questioned whether your approach is suited for the realities of warfare." The criticism was delivered diplomatically, but Sarah understood the underlying message. Her colleagues viewed her compassionate leadership style as a liability in combat situations. They saw her preference for listening over shouting, her tendency to consider multiple perspectives before making decisions, and her focus on human relationships as signs that she wasn't tough enough for the harsh realities of military conflict. "I appreciate the feedback, sir," Sarah said, maintaining her composure despite feeling frustrated. "I'm committed to serving wherever the Marine Corps needs me most effectively." Hayes studied her for a moment, then continued, "I'm recommending you for combat leadership training. It's time you gained experience in tactical operations and field command. The training will be challenging, and I won't sugarcoat it. Some of your fellow Marines have expressed doubts about your readiness for combat roles." Sarah felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. She joined the Marines with dreams of serving in meaningful ways, and combat leadership represented the ultimate test of military competence. However, she also understood that her gentle approach would be scrutinized and likely criticized by Marines, who equated toughness with aggression and strength with volume. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Thank you for the opportunity, sir. I won't disappoint you." After leaving Hayes's office, Sarah walked across the base to the training grounds where Marines were conducting small unit tactics exercises. She watched as squad leaders barked orders. Marines responded with crisp efficiency, and the entire operation moved with the kind of aggressive precision that characterized successful military operations. The question that had followed her throughout her career echoed in her mind. Could someone who led with empathy and understanding rather than fear and intimidation be effective in life or death situations? That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters writing letters to her brother Michael, to Jennifer Walsh, and to several other family members who were navigating difficult circumstances. Each letter was carefully crafted, offering specific encouragement. and practical advice tailored to the recipient's situation. As she wrote, Sarah reflected on the conversation with Captain Hayes and the upcoming combat training that would test everything she believed about leadership and strength. She'd spent years proving that gentleness wasn't weakness, that taking care of people wasn't a sign of softness, and that understanding human nature was a crucial military skill. Now she would have the opportunity to demonstrate whether those qualities could translate into effective combat leadership. The challenge ahead would test not just her physical capabilities, but her fundamental beliefs about what made a good Marine and a strong leader. Outside her window, the California night was clear and quiet, broken only by the distant sounds of Marines conducting evening training exercises. Sarah finished her letters, carefully placed them in stamped envelopes, and prepared for another early morning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and new chances to demonstrate that sometimes the gentlest approach was actually the strongest way forward. The combat leadership training that would change everything was still weeks away, but Sarah Chun was already preparing in the way she knew best, by taking care of the people around her, by paying attention to details others missed, and by approaching every challenge with the kind of thoughtful determination that had carried her this far. Whether her fellow Marines were ready to accept a different kind of strength remained to be seen. The combat leadership training course began 3 weeks later on a scorching Monday morning that promised temperatures above 100 degrees. Sarah arrived at the designated training area carrying her field pack and wearing the same determined expression that had carried her through every challenge in her military career. The training ground sprawled across several hundred acres of desert terrain, complete with mock villages, obstacle courses, and live fire ranges designed to simulate combat conditions. 24 Marines had been selected for the advanced leadership program, and Sarah quickly realized she was the only woman in the group. More significantly, she was the only participant who hadn't come from a traditional combat role. The other Marines were infantry specialists, reconnaissance experts, and weapons specialists who'd already proven themselves in field operations. Their conversations buzzed with references to previous deployments, firefights, and tactical operations that Sarah had only studied in manuals. The course instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Michael Torres, was a legendary figure within the Marine Corps. His chest displayed ribbons representing 3 combat deployments, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Bronze Star earned during urban warfare in Iraq. Torres commanded respect through a combination of tactical brilliance and aggressive leadership that had kept his units alive during some of the fiercest fighting of the past decade. "Ladies and gentlemen," Torres announced, though his eyes lingered on Sarah as he said the word ladies, "this course will test every aspect of your leadership capabilities under extreme stress. We're not here to play games or conduct classroom exercises. You'll face live ammunition, actual explosives, and scenarios designed to break Marines who aren't ready for the responsibilities of combat command." Sarah listened intently as Torres outlined the training schedule: urban warfare simulations, desert survival exercises, prisoner of war resistance training, and culminating field exercises that would require participants to lead squads through complex multi-day operations. Each phase would eliminate Marines who couldn't meet the demanding standards, with only the top performers receiving certification for combat leadership positions. The first week focused on basic tactical operations and small unit leadership. Sarah found herself consistently assigned to support roles during exercises, tasked with logistics coordination and communication duties, while other participants rotated through squad leader and team leader positions. When she approached Torres about the assignment pattern, he offered explanations that sounded reasonable but felt dismissive. "Chun, your administrative background makes you valuable for coordination roles," Torres explained after a particularly challenging urban assault exercise. "We need someone who can track ammunition supplies, coordinate medical evacuations, and maintain communication with higher command. Those skills are essential for mission success. Sarah understood the logic, but she also recognized the pattern. Her gentle demeanor and background in family support services had created assumptions about her capabilities and preferences. The other Marines weren't deliberately excluding her from leadership opportunities. They simply couldn't envision her in command roles that required what they perceived as aggressive, decisive action. During the second week, the training moved to advanced combat scenarios that required split-second decision-making under extreme pressure. Marines rotated through positions as team leaders, responsible for navigating their squads through leave-fire exercises while enemy role-players attempted to disrupt their missions. Sarah watched from communication positions as her colleagues shouted orders, made rapid tactical adjustments, and led their teams through dangerous terrain. Staff Sergeant Kevin Morrison, an infantry veteran with 2 Afghanistan deployments, emerged as an informal leader among the trainees. His aggressive style and combat experience earned immediate respect from other participants, and Marines naturally gravitated toward his tactical recommendations. During evening debriefings, Morrison often led discussions about strategy and technique, while Sarah contributed observations about logistics and coordination that were acknowledged but rarely incorporated into tactical planning. The exclusion wasn't malicious or deliberate, but it was systematic. When teams were formed for field exercises, Sarah was typically selected last and assigned to positions that required technical competence rather than leadership initiative. Her suggestions during planning sessions were politely received, but rarely implemented. Fellow Marines praised her organizational skills and attention to detail while simultaneously expressing doubts about her readiness for command responsibilities. The pattern became more pronounced during a nighttime urban warfare exercise that simulated clearing a hostile village. Marines were divided into 3 squads, each led by a different participant, with missions to secure separate sections of the mock town. Sarah was assigned to Morrison's squad as the communications specialist, responsible for maintaining contact with other teams and coordinating with simulated air support. The exercise began at 2,200 hours under conditions that perfectly replicated the confusion and intensity of actual combat operations. Blank ammunition created realistic muzzle flashes and noise, while pyrotechnics simulated explosions and incoming fire. Role players dressed as civilians and enemy combatants moved through the village, creating scenarios that required Marines to make rapid decisions about rules of engagement and civilian protection. Morrison led his squad with the kind of aggressive efficiency that characterized successful infantry operations. He issued clear, direct orders and expected immediate compliance without discussion or hesitation. When his point man identified a potential sniper position, Morrison quickly repositioned the squad and called for simulated artillery support to neutralize the threat. His leadership was textbook perfect for conventional military operations. However, Sarah noticed complications that Morrison's aggressive approach hadn't addressed. The simulated civilians in the area included families with children who were being traumatized by the noise and chaos of the operation. Several civilian role players were trying to communicate information about enemy positions, but Morrison's focus on rapid tactical movement left no time for gathering human intelligence. Most significantly, the squad's aggressive posture was creating fear among the civilian population that could potentially lead to intelligence gathering problems in extended operations. Sarah attempted to communicate these observations to Morrison during the exercise, but her suggestions were dismissed as irrelevant to the immediate tactical situation. "Chun, focus on maintaining communications with the other squads," Morrison replied curtly. "Leave the tactical decisions to me." The exercise concluded successfully from a military perspective. Morrison's squad eliminated all enemy role players, secured their assigned area, and suffered no simulated casualties. During the post-exercise debrief, Torres praised Morrison's decisive leadership and tactical competence. Other Marines nodded in agreement, recognizing the kind of aggressive, results-oriented approach they associated with effective combat command. Sarah raised her hand during the discussion. Sergeant Morrison's tactical execution was excellent, but I observed several opportunities for gathering human intelligence that we missed due to our approach with the civilian population. Building rapport with local civilians could have provided information about enemy movements and intentions. The room fell silent for a moment. Torres studied Sarah with an expression that suggested he was considering her comment carefully. "Chun, that's an interesting observation, but in combat situations, mission accomplishment and force protection take priority over community relations. We can't afford to slow down tactical operations for conversations with civilians," Morrison added, his own perspective. "With respect, Sergeant Chen, you weren't in a position to assess the tactical situation. Communication specialists need to focus on their assigned duties rather than second-guessing command decisions." Sarah felt the familiar frustration of being dismissed, but she also recognized something more troubling in the exchange. Her observation about civilian interaction wasn't just being ignored. It was being characterized as inappropriate for someone in her position. The underlying message was clear. Marines in support roles shouldn't question the tactical decisions of Marines in leadership positions. The pattern continued throughout the following weeks as training exercises became increasingly complex and demanding. Sarah consistently performed excellently in her assigned roles, maintaining flawless communications, coordinating logistics with remarkable efficiency, and providing technical support that earned praise from instructors. However, she was never given opportunities to demonstrate leadership capabilities or to implement the human-centered approaches that she believed could enhance mission effectiveness. During a week-long field exercise in the desert, Sarah's squad was tasked with establishing a forward operating base and conducting reconnaissance patrols in simulated enemy territory. She was assigned as the intelligence analyst, responsible for processing information gathered by patrol teams and briefing squad leaders on enemy activities. The role required her to work closely with Marines returning from reconnaissance missions, debriefing them on their observations and creating intelligence reports for tactical planning. Sarah approached the assignment with characteristic thoroughness, developing detailed maps of enemy positions, movement patterns, and supply routes based on information gathered by patrol teams. However, she also began noticing patterns that suggested opportunities for non-kinetic operations. Enemy role players were following predictable routines that could be exploited through careful timing rather than direct confrontation. Local terrain features offered concealment opportunities that could allow Marines to observe enemy activities without detection. More importantly, Sarah identified potential sources of human intelligence among the civilian role players who moved through the area. These civilians were clearly frightened by the presence of both enemy and friendly forces, but they possessed detailed knowledge about local conditions that could prove invaluable for extended operations. A gentle approach to civilian interaction could yield information that would make kinetic operations more effective and less dangerous. When Sarah presented her analysis to the squad leaders, her tactical recommendations were acknowledged, but her suggestions about civilian engagement were politely dismissed. Staff Sergeant Morrison, who had emerged as the unofficial leader among the participants, explained the decision during a planning meeting. "Chun's intelligence work has been outstanding, but we need to focus on kinetic solutions to tactical problems," Morrison stated. "Talking to civilians takes time we don't have and creates vulnerabilities we can't afford. Our mission is to locate and eliminate enemy forces, not to conduct community outreach." Sarah understood Morrison's perspective, but she also recognized that his approach reflected broader assumptions about military effectiveness that didn't account for the complexities of modern warfare. Her suggestions weren't about community outreach. They were about gathering intelligence and building situational awareness that could save Marine lives and improve mission success rates. The disconnect became more apparent during the final week of training when participants were evaluated on their performance in leadership positions. Sarah was finally given an opportunity to lead a squad during a complex urban warfare exercise, but the circumstances made success nearly impossible. She was assigned the most difficult mission objectives, given the least experienced Marines for her team, and provided minimal resources compared to other squad leaders. The exercise scenario involved rescuing simulated hostages from a multi-story building while minimizing civilian casualties and gathering intelligence about enemy operations. Sarah's team included Marines who had struggled with previous exercises, and her mission parameters included restrictions that other teams didn't face. She was required to achieve her objectives without using simulated heavy weapons or calling for air support that was available to other participants. Despite the challenges, Sarah approached the mission with careful planning and detailed preparation. She spent hours studying the building layout, analyzing civilian movement patterns, and developing contingency plans for various scenarios. Her approach emphasized stealth and intelligence gathering over aggressive assault tactics, recognizing that her limited resources required creative solutions rather than conventional military approaches. The exercise began with Sarah leading her team through careful reconnaissance of the target building. Instead of conducting an immediate assault, she positioned her Marines to observe enemy and civilian activities, gathering information about hostage locations, enemy numbers, and civilian escape routes. Her approach took longer than the aggressive tactics employed by other teams, but it also provided more detailed intelligence about the situation inside the building. When Sarah finally initiated the rescue operation, her team moved with precision and coordination that reflected careful planning and thorough preparation. They successfully rescued all simulated hostages, minimized civilian casualties, and gathered valuable intelligence about enemy operations. However, their methodical approach required more time than other teams, and Torres criticized the operations pace during the post-exercise debrief. "Chun, your planning was thorough and your execution was technically proficient," Torres acknowledged. "However, combat operations require speed and decisive action. Taking too much time for reconnaissance and planning can allow enemies to reinforce their positions or harm hostages." The criticism stung because Sarah recognized the validity of Torres's concerns, while also understanding that her careful approach had actually achieved better results than the faster, more aggressive operations conducted by other teams. Her team had rescued more hostages, gathered more intelligence, and suffered fewer simulated casualties, but those successes were overshadowed by concerns about operational tempo. Morrison offered his own assessment during the group discussion. Sergeant Chun clearly put a lot of effort into planning, but in real combat situations, Marines need leaders who can make quick decisions under pressure. Overthinking tactical problems can be just as dangerous as not thinking enough. Sarah left the exercise feeling frustrated and misunderstood. Her gentle approach wasn't about overthinking or hesitation. It was about maximizing effectiveness through careful preparation and situational awareness. However, her colleagues interpreted methodical planning as indecisiveness and concern for civilian welfare as tactical weakness. The final evaluation rankings reflected these perceptions. Sarah scored highly on technical competence, communication skills, and logistical management, but received lower marks on leadership potential and combat readiness. Morrison topped the rankings, followed by other Marines whose aggressive styles and combat experience aligned with traditional expectations about military leadership. As the training course concluded, Sarah realized that proving herself would require more than demonstrating competence in assigned roles. She needed opportunities to show that gentle leadership could be effective in combat situations. that methodical planning could save lives, and that understanding human nature was a crucial military skill. However, those opportunities seemed unlikely to arise within the traditional structure of Marine Corps operations. The real test of her capabilities lay ahead, waiting for a crisis that would require every skill she'd developed and every insight she'd gained about the difference between looking strong and actually being strong. 3 months after completing the combat leadership course, Sarah found herself assigned to Forward Operating Base Phoenix in eastern Afghanistan, a remote outpost responsible for security operations in the volatile Kunar province. The base housed approximately 400 Marines and soldiers from various units, all working to maintain stability in a region known for its challenging terrain and persistent insurgent activity. Sarah's official assignment was as the Intelligence Liaison Officer, a position that placed her at the intersection of combat operations and analytical support. The morning briefings at FOB Phoenix followed a rigid schedule that reflected the base's operational tempo. At 0630 hours, key personnel gathered in the Tactical Operations Center to review overnight activities, assess threat levels, and coordinate the day's missions. Sarah sat at a corner table with her laptop and classified intelligence reports, responsible for providing analytical support to mission planners and field commanders. Colonel Patricia Williams commanded the base with the kind of decisive authority that had earned her rapid promotion through the Marine Corps' hierarchy. Williams had built her reputation leading combat units during the height of fighting in Iraq, and her approach to operations emphasized aggressive patrolling, rapid response to enemy activity, and maintaining constant pressure on insurgent networks. Under her leadership, FOB Phoenix had achieved impressive statistics for enemy captures and weapon seizures. Major Daniel Foster served as the operations officer, coordinating daily missions and managing the complex logistics of maintaining security across dozens of villages and hundreds of square kilometers of mountainous terrain. Foster's background was in infantry operations, and he shared Colonel Williams's preference for kinetic solutions to tactical problems. Together, they had created an operational culture that prioritized decisive action and measurable results. Sarah's role in this environment was simultaneously crucial and marginalized. Her intelligence analysis directly influenced mission planning and tactical decisions, but she was rarely included in strategic discussions or operational command meetings. During morning briefings, she provided detailed reports on enemy activities, civilian population concerns, and environmental factors that could affect operations. However, her recommendations for non-kinetic approaches or community engagement strategies were consistently dismissed as outside her area of expertise. The pattern of exclusion that had characterized her training experience continued at FOB Phoenix, but with higher stakes and more serious consequences. When Marine patrols encountered resistance from local villagers, Sarah's suggestions for cultural sensitivity training were politely acknowledged but never implemented. When intelligence reports indicated that aggressive search operations were alienating civilian populations, her recommendations for modified approaches were noted but not acted upon. The disconnect between Sarah's analytical insights and operational decision-making became apparent during a particularly tense period in late October. Intelligence sources indicated that insurgent activity was increasing in several villages south of the base, with enemy fighters using civilian areas for concealment and supply operations. The traditional response involved increased patrols, expanded search operations, and closer surveillance of suspected insurgent supporters. Sarah spent hours analyzing intelligence reports, civilian complaint patterns, and historical data about insurgent activities in the region. Her analysis suggested that the recent increase in enemy activity was partially driven by civilian frustration with Marine operations that were perceived as heavy-handed and disrespectful of local customs. More significantly, her research indicated that previous successful counterinsurgency operations in similar areas had relied heavily on building trust with civilian populations rather than simply increasing military pressure. During a planning meeting for expanded operations, Sarah presented her findings to Colonel Williams and the operational staff. Her briefing included detailed maps showing correlation between civilian complaints and subsequent insurgent recruitment, statistical analysis of successful operations in comparable regions, and specific recommendations for modified approaches that could achieve better results with reduced risk to Marine personnel. "Ma'am, the data suggests that our current operational tempo may be creating some of the problems we're trying to solve," Sarah explained, displaying charts that showed the relationship between aggressive search operations and increased insurgent activity. Villages that have experienced multiple intrusive searches show significantly higher levels of insurgent recruitment and support. Colonel Williams listened to the briefing with professional attention, but her response reflected the operational priorities that had shaped her entire career. "Sergeant Chun, your analysis is thorough, but we can't allow concerns about civilian sensitivities to compromise our security operations. Our mission is to disrupt insurgent networks and protect Marine personnel, not to conduct sociology experiments." Major Foster supported Williams's position with tactical arguments that sounded reasonable but dismissed the strategic implications of Sarah's analysis. "Chun's data is interesting, but we need to focus on actionable intelligence rather than theoretical discussions about community relations. If insurgents are using civilian areas for concealment, our response needs to be more aggressive, not less." Sarah understood their perspective, but she also recognized that their approach was creating a cycle of escalation that ultimately made Marine operations more dangerous and less effective. Her gentle suggestion for incorporating community engagement specialists into patrol operations was dismissed as unnecessary complexity. Her recommendation for modified search procedures that respected local customs while maintaining security effectiveness was characterized as operational hesitation. The real tension emerged when Sarah's intelligence analysis began contradicting the assumptions that drove operational planning. Traditional military intelligence focused on enemy capabilities, movements, and intentions, providing information that supported kinetic responses to tactical problems. Sarah's approach incorporated human terrain analysis, civilian population dynamics, and cultural factors that suggested more nuanced solutions to complex security challenges. Her daily intelligence reports began including sections on civilian concerns, community leader perspectives, and social dynamics that affected insurgent recruitment and support. These additions were initially welcomed as providing comprehensive situational awareness, but they gradually became sources of friction when Sarah's recommendations didn't align with preferred operational approaches. The breaking point came during preparations for Operation Iron Thunder, a large-scale sweep designed to clear insurgent networks from a cluster of villages that had shown increased enemy activity. The operation would involve multiple Marine companies conducting simultaneous searches, weapon sweeps, and detention operations across a wide area. Planning for Iron Thunder reflected the kind of aggressive, coordinated approach that had been successful in previous operations. Sarah's intelligence preparation for the operation was exhaustive, involving weeks of analysis that examined every aspect of the target area. She studied village layouts, family relationships, economic activities, religious practices, and historical grievances that could affect civilian cooperation with Marine operations. Her research identified specific individuals who could serve as intermediaries, cultural sensitivities that could influence operational success, and potential sources of human intelligence that could make kinetic operations more effective. However, Sarah's analysis also revealed significant risks associated with the planned approach. The target villages included several communities that had previously cooperated with Marine operations, providing information about insurgent activities and supporting security improvements. The aggressive search procedures planned for Iron Thunder would likely alienate these cooperative communities and potentially drive them toward supporting insurgent networks. More troubling, Sarah's research indicated that the intelligence driving Operation Iron Thunder was based on information that may have been deliberately planted by insurgent networks to provoke an overreaction by Marine forces. Several of the suspected weapon caches and insurgent meeting locations had been reported by sources with questionable motivations, and the timing of the intelligence reports suggested possible manipulation designed to trigger exactly the kind of large-scale operation that was being planned. When Sarah presented these concerns during final planning meetings, her analysis was met with skepticism that bordered on hostility. Major Foster questioned whether her approach was appropriate for someone in an intelligence role, suggesting that her focus on civilian considerations was compromising her analytical objectivity. Chun, your job is to provide intelligence support for operational planning, not to second-guess mission concepts developed by experienced combat leaders, Foster stated during a particularly tense briefing. These community relations concerns you keep raising are outside your area of responsibility. Colonel Williams was more diplomatic but equally dismissive of Sarah's concerns. Sergeant Chun, I appreciate your thoroughness, but we can't allow analysis paralysis to prevent us from taking action against known threats. Intelligence work requires focus on enemy activities, not speculation about civilian reactions. Sarah felt the familiar frustration of being marginalized, but this time the stakes were significantly higher than training exercises or administrative discussions. Operation Iron Thunder would involve hundreds of Marines conducting dangerous operations based on potentially compromised intelligence, and her concerns about civilian relations weren't academic theories, but practical considerations that could affect mission success and Marine safety. The exclusion became more personal when other intelligence personnel began distancing themselves from Sarah's analytical approach. Staff Sergeant Robert Kim, who had worked closely with Sarah on previous projects, started avoiding collaboration on reports that included her community-focused analysis. Corporal Jennifer Martinez, who had initially appreciated Sarah's attention to cultural factors, began expressing concerns that Sarah's approach was making the intelligence section appear unfocused and unreliable. Chun, I think you need to be careful about how far you push these civilian considerations, Kim warned during a private conversation. Colonel Williams values actionable intelligence, not academic reports about social dynamics. You're starting to develop a reputation for overthinking operational problems. The warning reflected broader concerns within the intelligence section about maintaining credibility with operational commanders. Intelligence personnel understood that their influence depended on providing information that supported effective military operations, not on raising questions about operational concepts or suggesting alternative approaches that weren't requested. Sarah's isolation deepened when Major Foster assigned her to conduct detailed analysis of enemy weapons and tactics, specifically excluding her from intelligence preparation related to civilian population dynamics. The reassignment was presented as a way to utilize her analytical skills more effectively, but Sarah recognized it as an attempt to limit her influence on operational planning. Chun, I want you to focus on technical intelligence for the next several weeks, Foster explained. We need detailed analysis of improvised explosive device patterns, enemy communication methods, and weapons trafficking routes. Leave the population analysis to personnel with specific training in those areas. The assignment was professionally appropriate, but it effectively removed Sarah from any role in questioning operational approaches or suggesting alternative strategies. Her technical analysis was valuable and necessary, but it didn't provide opportunities to influence the broader strategic thinking that shaped Marine operations in the region. As Operation Iron Thunder approached, Sarah watched preparations proceed according to plans that she believed were fundamentally flawed. The operation would achieve tactical success by any traditional measure, capturing suspected insurgents and seizing weapons caches. However, it would also alienate civilian populations, validate insurgent propaganda about American military aggression, and potentially create more problems than it solved. Sarah's attempts to raise these concerns through appropriate channels had been systematically dismissed or redirected. Her reputation as someone who overthought operational problems and focused too heavily on civilian considerations had effectively marginalized her influence on mission planning. The gentle approach that had served her well in family support roles was perceived as weakness and indecision in the high-stakes environment of combat operations. The night before Operation Iron Thunder was scheduled to begin, Sarah sat in her quarters writing a detailed memo that outlined her concerns about the operation and her recommendations for modified approaches. The memo was addressed to Colonel Williams with copies to Major Foster and the intelligence section leadership. Sarah knew that submitting the memo would likely damage her career prospects and further strain her relationships with colleagues. But she also knew that her analysis was correct and that Marine lives might depend on someone raising these concerns. The memo was never sent. As Sarah prepared to deliver it to Colonel Williams, an emergency alert interrupted the base's evening routine. A Marine patrol had been ambushed in the northern sector, with multiple casualties and requests for immediate support. Operation Iron Thunder was postponed as the base shifted resources to respond to the crisis. The ambush would prove to be the catalyst that finally gave Sarah the opportunity to demonstrate whether her gentle approach could be effective in life-or-death situations, and whether the colleagues who had dismissed her analytical insights would be willing to trust her judgment when traditional approaches had failed. The emergency radio transmission crackled through Phobe Phoenix at 2,147 hours, cutting through the evening quiet like a knife. Sarah was in the intelligence center reviewing satellite imagery when the desperate voice of Corporal Jake Stevens pierced the routine chatter of base communications. Phoenix Base, this is Bravo 2-1. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate support. We have casualties and need emergency extraction. The Tactical Operations Center erupted into controlled chaos as duty personnel rushed to assess the situation and coordinate a response. Sarah immediately pulled up the digital mapping system, locating Bravo 2-1's last known position in the Korengal Valley, approximately 12 kilometers northeast of the base. The patrol had been conducting a routine reconnaissance mission in an area considered relatively secure, but intelligence reports had indicated increased insurgent movement in recent days. Colonel Williams arrived in the operations center within minutes, her uniform hastily assembled, but her command presence immediately apparent. Major Foster was already coordinating with air support assets and preparing quick reaction force deployment. The radio continued transmitting fragments of information. Between bursts of automatic weapons fire and the distinctive sound of rocket-propelled grenades exploding near the Marine position. Bravo 2-1, this is Phoenix Actual, Williams transmitted on the command frequency. Report your status and enemy strength. Stevens' response came through static and background noise that made the severity of the situation clear. Phoenix Actual, we're pinned down in a compound approximately 2 clicks south of Checkpoint Alpha. Enemy strength is estimated at 20 to 30 fighters with heavy weapons. We have 4 wounded, 2 critical. Request immediate helicopter extraction. Sarah studied the satellite imagery of the area, cross-referencing recent intelligence reports with terrain analysis that revealed the complexity of the tactical situation. The compound where Bravo 2-1 was trapped sat in a narrow valley surrounded by steep ridges that provided excellent positions for enemy fighters. More significantly, the area was known for its complex cave systems and prepared fighting positions that insurgent networks had developed over years of conflict. The immediate challenge was clear. Bravo 2-1 was outnumbered and outgunned in terrain that favored the enemy. Standard extraction procedures would require helicopter insertion of additional forces to secure a landing zone, but the confined terrain and heavy enemy fire made direct helicopter operations extremely dangerous. Ground-based relief forces would need hours to reach the location, through mountainous terrain that provided numerous opportunities for ambush. Major Foster coordinated with the aviation unit to assess helicopter extraction options, while Colonel Williams considered ground-based relief operations. The discussion revealed the harsh realities of operating in Afghanistan's unforgiving terrain. Every option involved significant risks and uncertain outcomes. "Ma'am, aviation reports that direct extraction is not feasible due to enemy fire and terrain limitations," Foster informed Williams. "The valley is too narrow for safe helicopter operations, and the enemy positions on the ridges make approach extremely dangerous." Williams studied the tactical display, her expression reflecting the weight of command decisions that could determine whether 12 Marines lived or died. "What about ground relief? How long does it take to get a quick reaction force to their position?" Foster consulted with the operations staff before providing an answer that confirmed everyone's worst fears. Minimum 4 hours by vehicle to reach the general area, then additional time for foot movement through hostile terrain. The route includes multiple choke points where enemy forces could establish ambushes. Sarah continued analyzing intelligence data while listening to the command discussions, building a comprehensive picture of the tactical situation that included factors beyond immediate military considerations. Her analysis revealed patterns in enemy behavior, civilian population dynamics, and terrain features that suggested alternative approaches to the crisis. The enemy fighters attacking Bravo 2-1 were likely from a local network that had intimate knowledge of the terrain and prepared positions throughout the valley. However, Sarah's research on the area indicated that the same insurgent network had historically avoided prolonged engagements when faced with coordinated pressure from multiple directions. More importantly, the valley contains several villages whose populations had provided intelligence to Marine forces in the past. As the command staff debated relief options, Sarah approached Colonel Williams with an analysis that challenged conventional tactical thinking. "Ma'am, I've been studying the intelligence picture for this area, and I believe there may be alternative approaches to extracting Bravo 2-1. Williams looked up from the tactical display with an expression that reflected the stress of managing a crisis where traditional solutions seemed inadequate. "Chun, unless you have information about enemy positions or capabilities that changes our assessment, I need to focus on operational planning." Sarah understood the colonel's priorities, but she also recognized that her analysis could provide insights that might save Marine lives. "Ma'am, my research indicates that local civilian populations in the valley have previously provided intelligence about insurgent activities. There may be opportunities to gather information about enemy positions and movement patterns that could support extraction operations." Major Foster interrupted the conversation with barely concealed frustration. "Chun, this isn't the time for community outreach programs. We have Marines under fire who need immediate military support, not cultural sensitivity discussions." The dismissal reflected the operational mindset that had characterized Sarah's entire experience at Phobe Phoenix, but the current crisis provided stark clarity about the consequences of ignoring non-kinetic approaches to tactical problems. Traditional military solutions were failing to provide viable options for rescuing Bravo 2-1, and time was running out for Marines who were fighting for their lives. Sarah persisted despite the obvious reluctance of the command staff to consider her suggestions. "Sir, I'm not talking about community outreach. I'm talking about intelligence gathering that could provide tactical advantages for extraction operations. Local civilians may have information about enemy positions, movement routes, and defensive preparations that could make helicopter or ground operations more feasible." Colonel Williams studied Sarah for a moment, weighing the potential value of Unconventional approaches against the urgency of the situation. Chun, do you have specific intelligence about civilian sources in the area who could provide actionable information? Sarah's response drew on months of analytical work that her colleagues had dismissed as irrelevant to operational planning. Ma'am, I've identified several individuals in the valley who have previously provided accurate intelligence about insurgent activities. More importantly, I've developed relationships with family members of these sources who are currently on the base as part of our local national employment program. The revelation surprised the command staff, who hadn't realized that Sarah's analytical work included detailed mapping of human intelligence networks throughout the region. Her gentle approach to building relationships had created access to information, sources that traditional intelligence gathering methods had overlooked. Foster's skepticism was evident in his response. Chun, even if you can contact these sources, how does that help us extract Marines who are under fire right now? We need immediate tactical solutions, not long-term intelligence development. Sarah had anticipated this objection and had already developed a plan that combined her understanding of local networks with practical military considerations. Sir, one of the local national employees is Abdul Rahman, whose brother lives in the village nearest to Bravo 21's position. Rahman has access to family communication networks that operate independently of insurgent surveillance. He could potentially contact his brother to gather real-time intelligence about enemy positions and identify safe routes for extraction operations. The proposal represented exactly the kind of creative problem-solving that Sarah's analytical approach had been developing, but it also required the command staff to trust sources and methods that fell outside traditional military intelligence procedures. Colonel Williams considered the suggestion while monitoring continued radio transmissions from Bravo 21 that indicated their situation was deteriorating rapidly. Chun, assuming Rahman is willing to help and his brother can provide useful information, how long would it take to develop actionable intelligence? Williams asked. Sarah's response reflected careful preparation and detailed knowledge of local communication methods. Ma'am, Rahman could contact his brother within minutes using family communication networks. If his brother is willing to provide information, we could have intelligence about enemy positions and safe routes within 30 minutes. Major Foster remained skeptical about relying on unverified civilian sources during a crisis situation. Colonel, this approach involves significant risks. We'd be basing extraction operations on intelligence from sources we can't independently verify, provided through communication methods we don't control. Sarah understood Foster's concerns, but she also recognized that conventional approaches had failed to provide viable alternatives. Sir, the intelligence would be used to supplement, not replace traditional reconnaissance methods. We could verify civilian reports through drone surveillance and signals intelligence before committing to extraction operations. The debate was interrupted by another transmission from Bravo 21 that made the urgency of the situation clear. Phoenix Actual, this is Bravo 21. Enemy forces are massing for assault on our position. We're running low on ammunition and have 2 Marines who need immediate medical attention. Request emergency support. Colonel Williams made the decision that would change everything. Chun, contact Rahman immediately and see what information his brother can provide. Foster, continue planning conventional extraction options. We'll use every available resource to get our people out. Sarah rushed to locate Abdul Rahman, who was working the night shift in the base motor pool. Rahman was a 40-year-old Afghan who had been employed by Marine forces for 8 months, providing mechanical support and serving as a cultural advisor for community engagement activities. His brother, Mahmoud, lived in the village of Khost. While firing, approximately 1 kilometer from where Bravo 21 was trapped, the conversation with Rahman required delicate handling, as Sarah was essentially asking him to request that his brother risk his life by gathering intelligence about insurgent activities. Rahman's willingness to help would depend on his trust in Sarah and his confidence that the information would be used responsibly. "Mr. Rahman," Sarah began, speaking in the mixture of English and Dari that had become their working language. "We have Marines in danger near your brother's village. We need information about enemy positions to help rescue our people. Can you contact Mahmud to ask if he can safely provide information about what he's seeing?" Rahman's response reflected the complex loyalties and dangerous realities that characterized civilian life in wartime Afghanistan. "Sergeant Chun, my brother is a good man, wants to help Americans. But if the Taliban know he give information, they kill him and his family. You understand this danger?" Sarah understood the risks better than most of her colleagues, having spent months studying the human terrain that shaped civilian decision-making in contested areas. "Yes, Mr. Rahman, I understand the danger to your brother and his family. We would never ask him to do anything that puts his family at risk. But if he can safely observe and report what he sees, it might help us save American lives." Rahman considered the request for a long moment, weighing family loyalty against personal safety and his relationship with the Marines, who had treated him with respect and dignity. "I call my brother. If he can help without danger, he will help. But you must promise no one know information come from him." Sarah agreed to Rahman's conditions and accompanied him to a secure communication area where he could contact his brother using a cell phone that operated on civilian networks independent of military surveillance. The conversation was conducted in rapid Dari, with Rahman explaining the situation and requesting information about insurgent activities near the American position. Mahmud's response, translated by Rahman, provided exactly the kind of tactical intelligence that could make extraction operations feasible. The enemy fighters had established positions on 3 ridges surrounding the compound, with heavy weapons positioned to cover the main approach routes. However, Mahmud had observed that the insurgents had left the northern approach relatively unguarded, apparently assuming that the steep terrain made movement from that direction impossible. More importantly, Mahmud reported that the enemy fighters were using a specific cave system for ammunition storage and command operations. The cave entrance was visible from his position and could potentially be targeted to disrupt enemy coordination. Additionally, he indicated that several insurgent fighters had left their positions to retrieve additional ammunition, suggesting that sustained defensive fire might be depleting their supplies. Sarah rushed back to the Tactical Operations Center with intelligence that transformed the entire tactical picture. The information provided by Mahmud, combined with drone surveillance and signals intelligence, revealed enemy vulnerabilities that made extraction operations feasible through approaches that traditional reconnaissance had overlooked. Colonel Williams studied the new intelligence while coordinating with aviation and ground units to develop extraction options. "Chun, this information changes everything. If we can confirm these enemy positions and approach routes, we have viable options for getting our people out." The next phase of the crisis would test whether Sarah's gentle approach to building human relationships could translate into effective tactical operations, and whether the Marines of Bravo 2-1 could survive long enough for unconventional solutions to conventional military problems to prove their worth. The intelligence provided by Mahmud transformed the tactical situation, but implementing extraction operations based on civilian sources required careful coordination and split-second timing. Colonel Williams and Major Foster huddled over the digital mapping display, comparing Mahmud's observations with drone footage that confirmed enemy positions on the surrounding ridges. The northern approach route that Mahmud had identified as lightly defended showed potential for helicopter insertion, but the terrain remained treacherous and the operation would require precise execution. Aviation reports they can attempt extraction using the northern approach, but they'll need ground support to suppress enemy positions during the helicopter insertion. Foster informed Williams. "We're looking at a minimum 30-minute window to coordinate air assets, artillery support, and communication with Bravo 2-1. Sarah monitored the planning discussion while maintaining contact with Rahman, who was coordinating with his brother to provide real-time updates on enemy activities. Mahmoud's position in the village gave him visual oversight of the entire valley, and his reports indicated that insurgent fighters were repositioning their forces to prepare for a final assault on the compound where Bravo 2-1 was trapped. Radio transmission from Corporal Stevens confirmed everyone's worst fears. "Phoenix Actual, enemy forces are massing approximately 200 meters from our position. We can see fighters moving through the tree line with heavy weapons. Estimate we have maybe 15 minutes before they're in position to overrun our position." 15 minutes was not enough time to coordinate the complex extraction operation that Foster and Williams were developing. Traditional military planning required careful preparation, redundant communication systems, and coordinated timing between multiple units. The mathematical reality was stark. Bravo 2-1 would be overrun before relief forces could reach them through conventional operational procedures. Sarah realized that saving the trapped Marines would require someone to take immediate action. Using the intelligence network she had developed, operating outside the formal command structure that couldn't move quickly enough to respond to the crisis. The decision she was contemplating would violate every protocol she'd learned about proper channels and chain of command, but it was also the only option that offered realistic hope for saving 12 Marine lives, while Colonel Williams and Major Foster continued coordination efforts. Sarah quietly approached Rahman with a proposal that would put both of them at enormous personal risk. "Mr. Rahman, your brother's information shows there might be a way to help the trapped Marines, but it would require someone to go into the valley to guide them to safety. The official rescue operation will take too long." Rahman understood the implications immediately. "You want to go into the valley yourself? This is very dangerous, Sergeant Chun. Taliban kill anyone they find helping Americans." Sarah had already considered the risks and reached the conclusion that someone with detailed knowledge of the local terrain and civilian network needed to coordinate the rescue operation from within the valley. The trapped Marines needed real-time guidance through safe routes that only someone with access to Mahmoud's observations could provide. More importantly, extracting 12 wounded Marines through hostile territory would require the kind of careful, patient leadership that her colleagues had consistently dismissed as inappropriate for combat situations. "Mr. Rahman, I know the risks, but I also know that your brother's information gives us the best chance to save these Marines. I need you to coordinate communication between me and Mahmoud so I can guide our people to safety." Rahman studied Sarah's face, recognizing the determination that had characterized her approach to every challenge she'd encountered. "If you go into the valley, I will go with you. My brother trusts me, and I know the trails. You cannot do this alone." Sarah's initial instinct was to refuse Rahman's offer, recognizing that his participation would put a civilian at risk and potentially create additional complications for the rescue operation. However, she also understood that Rahman's local knowledge and family connections were essential for navigating the complex human terrain that could determine the mission's success or failure. "Mr. Rahman, if you come with me, you understand that we might not return. If we're captured, the Taliban will consider you a traitor for helping Americans." Rahman's response reflected the courage and loyalty that had made him a valued member of the base community. "Sergeant Chun, Americans treat my family with respect. Give my children an opportunity for education. If I can help save American lives, this is the right thing to do." Sarah knew that leaving the base without authorization would end her military career and potentially result in court-martial proceedings. However, she also knew that the alternative was watching 12 Marines die while appropriate authorities followed procedures that couldn't respond quickly enough to save them. Her decision was made not from recklessness or insubordination, but from the same careful analysis that had characterized her entire approach to military service. While the command staff continued coordinating official rescue operations, Sarah and Rahman quietly gathered equipment for an unauthorized infiltration mission. Sarah selected lightweight tactical gear that would allow rapid movement through mountainous terrain, including night vision equipment, a satellite radio for maintaining communication with the base, and medical supplies for treating wounded Marines. Rahman contributed local civilian clothing that would help them blend with the rural population if they encountered insurgent patrols. The base's security procedures were designed to prevent unauthorized entry, but they were less effective at preventing personnel from leaving the facility. Sarah and Rahman exited through a vehicle maintenance area where Rahman's familiarity with security routines allowed them to avoid detection. Within 20 minutes of making the decision to act, they were moving through the darkness toward the Korangal Valley. The 12-kilometer trek to the area where Bravo 2-1 was trapped required navigation through terrain that combined steep mountain trails with rocky ridges that provided concealment from enemy observation. Sarah's physical conditioning, developed through months of training that her colleagues had dismissed as excessive preparation, proved essential for maintaining the pace necessary to reach the Marines before the insurgent assault began. Rahman led the way through trails that didn't appear on military maps, routes used by local shepherds and traders who had moved through these mountains for generations. His knowledge of the terrain allowed them to avoid areas where insurgent patrols were likely to establish checkpoints, while his understanding of local customs helped them navigate encounters with civilian populations who might report their presence to enemy fighters. As they moved through the darkness, Sarah maintained radio contact with the base using a satellite communication system that operated independently of conventional military networks. Her transmissions were brief and encoded, providing Colonel Williams with updates on their progress while avoiding detailed discussions that could compromise operational security. Phoenix Base, this is Chun. Package delivery in progress. F.A. Weeday. To the customer location in 30 minutes. Williams's response reflected both concern about Sarah's unauthorized mission and recognition that CONVENTIONAL extraction efforts were unlikely to succeed in time. Chun understood. Be advised the official support package was delayed due to coordination requirements. Customer requests immediate assistance. The coded language acknowledged the reality that Sarah and Rahman were operating as an independent rescue team while official relief efforts continued through proper channels. Williams couldn't officially authorize their mission, but she also couldn't order them to abandon Marines who might die without immediate assistance. As they approached the valley where Bravo 2-1 was trapped, Rahman established contact with his brother using a handheld radio that operated on civilian frequencies. Mahmoud's reports indicated that insurgent fighters had completed their preparations for assault and were beginning final positioning for an attack on the compound. Time had run out for conventional military solutions. Sarah studied the terrain through night vision equipment, comparing Mahmoud's descriptions with satellite imagery she had memorized during mission planning. The compound where the Marines were trapped sat in a depression surrounded by rocky ridges that provided excellent defensive positions for enemy fighters. However, Mahmoud's observations revealed that the insurgents had concentrated their forces on the southern and eastern approaches, leaving the northern route relatively unguarded. More importantly, Mahmoud had identified a series of interconnected caves and ravines that could provide concealed movement routes for extracting the wounded Marines. The terrain was difficult and would require careful coordination, but it offered possibilities for moving 12 men through hostile territory without detection by enemy forces. Sarah's plan combined traditional military tactics with the kind of patient, methodical approach that her colleagues had criticized as inappropriate for combat operations. Instead of attempting to fight their way out of the encirclement, she would use Mahmoud's intelligence to guide the Marines through concealed routes that bypassed enemy positions entirely. The approach required careful timing and coordination, but it offered the best chance for extracting wounded personnel without additional casualties. The radio transmission from Corporal Stevens indicated that the final phase of the crisis was beginning. Phoenix Actual, enemy assault commencing. We're taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Request immediate support. Sarah responded using her satellite radio, speaking directly to the trapped Marines for the first time. Bravo 2-1, this is Chun. I'm approximately 200 meters from your position with the local guide. Prepare for extraction through the northern route. Can you move wounded personnel? Stevens's response reflected both surprise and relief at receiving immediate support. Chun, affirmative on moving wounded. 2 Marines require assistance, but we can carry them. What are your instructions? Sarah's extraction plan required the Marines to move through terrain that would challenge healthy personnel and potentially impossible for wounded individuals. However, Mahmoud's intelligence indicated that the alternative was almost certain death when insurgent forces completed their assault. The choice was between certain risk and probable disaster. Bravo 2-1, you'll be moving through rocky terrain to reach the extraction point. Local guide will lead. I'll coordinate from overwatch position. Movement will be slow and careful. No radio transmissions unless emergency. Rahman approached the compound using routes that Mahmoud had identified as concealed from enemy observation. Sarah positioned herself on higher ground, where she could maintain visual contact with both the Marines and potential enemy positions, while coordinating movement through the extraction route. The operation required split-second timing and perfect coordination between people who had never worked together under combat conditions. The next 30 minutes would test whether Sarah's gentle approach to leadership could guide 12 Marines through hostile territory, whether Rahman's courage and local knowledge could overcome the dangers of assisting American forces, and whether Mahmoud's intelligence could prove accurate enough to save lives. As insurgent gunfire echoed through the valley and flares illuminated the compound where Bravo 2-1 was fighting for survival, Sarah keyed her radio and began the most important mission of her military career. Bravo 2-1, begin movement now. Follow my guide exactly. Stay low, move slow, and trust the process. We're bringing everyone home. The extraction operation unfolded with the kind of methodical precision that had characterized Sarah's approach to every challenge throughout her military career. Rahman moved through the darkness like a ghost, his intimate knowledge of the terrain allowing him to guide the Marines through routes that insurgent forces had failed to anticipate or secure. Sarah coordinated from her overwatch position, using night vision equipment to monitor enemy movements while providing real-time guidance to the extraction team below. The wounded Marines presented the greatest challenge, requiring careful movement through rocky terrain that tested the physical limits of even healthy personnel. Lance Corporal Michael Torres had sustained shrapnel wounds to his legs that made walking extremely difficult, while Private First Class Anthony Davis was suffering from a head injury that affected his balance and coordination. The remaining 10 Marines formed a protective formation around their wounded comrades, moving with the kind of quiet determination that reflected their trust in Sarah's unconventional leadership. Corporal Stevens, who had assumed tactical leadership of Bravo 2-1 during the crisis, maintained constant whispered communication with Sarah as the group navigated through the extraction route. His initial skepticism about following guidance from someone known primarily for administrative duties had given way to professional respect for Sarah's tactical competence and detailed preparation. Chun, we're approaching the ravine you described. Stevens transmitted. Torres is struggling with the rough terrain, but we can continue movement. Sarah adjusted her position to maintain visual contact with the Marines while monitoring insurgent activities that continued around the abandoned compound. Enemy fighters had discovered that their targets had escaped, and radio intercepts suggested they were beginning search operations to locate the missing Americans. Time remained critical, but the methodical extraction was proceeding according to plan. Bravo 2-1, continue through the ravine for approximately 200 meters, then hold position while the guide identifies the next movement route. Enemy forces beginning area search, but you're moving through dead space they haven't considered. Rahman's coordination with his brother proved invaluable as the extraction progressed through increasingly complex terrain. Mahmoud continued providing intelligence about enemy movements, allowing Sarah to adjust the extraction route to avoid areas where insurgent patrols were conducting searches. The civilian intelligence network that Sarah had developed was proving more effective than conventional military reconnaissance for navigating the human terrain that shaped tactical realities. The most dangerous phase of the extraction came when the Marines needed to cross an open area that provided no concealment from enemy observation. Sarah's plan required precise timing to move 12 people across exposed ground during a brief window when enemy attention was focused elsewhere. The approach demanded the kind of patient, coordinated leadership that emphasized careful planning over aggressive action. Bravo 2-1, prepare for movement across an open area. You'll have approximately 3 minutes while enemy forces investigate a false target to the south. Move quickly but maintain noise discipline. No one gets left behind. Sarah coordinated the crossing by positioning herself where she could observe both the Marines and potential enemy threats, using hand signals and whispered radio communications to guide the group across the exposed terrain. The wounded Marines required assistance from their teammates, slowing the movement but ensuring that everyone reached the concealment of the far tree line without detection. As the extraction continued through the pre-dawn hours, Sarah reflected on the irony that her most successful military operation was also the one that would likely end her career. Her unauthorized departure from the base violated fundamental principles of military discipline, regardless of the mission's outcome. However, watching 12 Marines move safely through hostile territory under her guidance provided validation that her approach to leadership could be effective even in the most challenging combat situations. The final phase of the extraction brought the Marines to a concealed landing zone that Mahmoud had identified as suitable for helicopter operations. The area was protected from enemy observation by natural terrain features and was large, enough to accommodate the medical evacuation aircraft that Colonel Williams had positioned for rapid response. Sarah's coordination with the base had ensured that official rescue operations could complete the mission. Once her unauthorized extraction had moved the Marines to a location where conventional military procedures could operate effectively. Phoenix Base, this is Chen. Package secured at delivery location. Request immediate pickup for wounded personnel. Colonel Williams's response reflected the complex mixture of relief and concern that characterized the command staff's reaction to Sarah's successful but unauthorized mission. Chun, medical evacuation en route, ETA 5 minutes. Be advised we need immediate debrief upon your return to base. The helicopter extraction proceeded without incident, with wounded Marines receiving immediate medical attention while the remaining personnel provided security during the pickup operation. Sarah and Rahman remained concealed near the landing zone until the official rescue was complete, then began their own return journey to FOB Phoenix. As dawn broke over the Korangal Valley, the 12-hour trek back to base provided time for Sarah to consider the consequences of her actions and prepare for the inevitable investigation that would follow. She had saved 12 Marine lives through methods that her superiors had consistently dismissed as inappropriate for combat operations. But she had also violated military regulations in ways that could result in court-martial proceedings and discharge from the Marine Corps. Renan walked beside her with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had risked everything for principles that transcended personal safety. His decision to assist the rescue operation had demonstrated the kind of courage that earned respect regardless of nationality or uniform, and his local knowledge had proved essential for navigating terrain that challenged conventional military capabilities. "Sergeant Chun," Rehman said as they approached the base perimeter, "you save American lives, but maybe you have big problems with your commanders now. I am sorry if my help caused trouble for you." Sarah appreciated Rahman's concern, but she had no regrets about decisions that had brought 12 Marines home safely. "Mr. Rehman, you showed incredible courage tonight. Whatever happens to me, those Marines are alive because you were willing to help. That's what matters." The return to Fob Phoenix brought immediate summons to Colonel Williams's office, where Sarah faced the kind of formal inquiry that she had anticipated since making the decision to act without authorization. Major Foster was present, along with the base legal officer and a representative from the Inspector General's office who had been notified about the unauthorized operation. Colonel Williams opened the discussion with questions that reflected both professional concern and grudging respect for Sarah's successful mission. "Sergeant Chen, before we address the irregularities in your actions, I want to acknowledge that 12 Marines are alive because of your initiative. However, your departure from base without authorization represents a serious breach of military discipline that requires investigation." Sarah had prepared for this moment during the long walk back to base, formulating responses that acknowledged her violations while explaining the reasoning that had driven her decisions. "Ma'am, I understand that my actions violated proper procedures. However, I assessed that conventional extraction methods could not respond quickly enough to save the trapped Marines. I take full responsibility for my decisions." Major Foster's questions focused on the operational aspects of the unauthorized mission, seeking to understand how Sarah had accomplished results that official rescue efforts had been unable to achieve. "Chun, your extraction succeeded where our conventional approaches failed. Can you explain the methods you used and how you coordinated with civilian sources?" Sarah's explanation revealed the depth of preparation and relationship building that had made the rescue possible, work that her colleagues had dismissed as irrelevant to operational requirements. "Sir, I had developed relationships with local civilians who provided intelligence about terrain and enemy activities. Mr. Rahman's family connections gave us access to real-time information that wasn't available through conventional intelligence methods." The legal officer's questions addressed the regulatory violations that could result in formal charges against Sarah. "Sergeant Chen, did you receive authorization from any superior officer before departing the base to conduct rescue operations?" Sarah's response was direct and honest, acknowledging violations while maintaining that her actions were justified by the circumstances. "No, sir. I acted without authorization because I assessed that formal approval processes could not respond quickly enough to save Marine lives." The inquiry continued for several hours, covering every aspect of the unauthorized mission and its successful outcome. Sarah answered all questions honestly, providing detailed explanations of her planning, coordination with civilian sources, and tactical decisions that had enabled the extraction. Throughout the discussion, she maintained that saving Marine lives had justified the risks and violations involved in her unauthorized actions. Colonel Williams concluded the formal inquiry with observations that reflected the complex nature of military leadership in modern warfare. "Sergeant Chun, your actions represent both the best and worst aspects of military initiative. You demonstrated exceptional courage and tactical competence in saving Marine lives, but you also showed disregard for military discipline and proper procedures." Sarah understood that her military career hung in the balance, dependent on decisions that would weigh her successful results against her procedural violations. "Ma'am, I stand by my actions and accept responsibility for the consequences." I would make the same decisions again if faced with similar circumstances. The aftermath of the rescue operation created ripple effects throughout Fabio, Phoenix as personnel struggled to reconcile Sarah's successful mission with the regulatory violations that had made it possible. Some Marines praised her courage and initiative, recognizing that conventional approaches had failed where her unconventional methods had succeeded. Others expressed concern about the precedent of ignoring proper procedures. Regardless of the positive outcomes, Staff Sergeant Morrison, who had emerged as a vocal critic of Sarah's approach during combat leadership training, found himself reassessing assumptions about military effectiveness that had shaped his entire career. The Marines of Bravo 2-1 were unanimous in their gratitude for Sarah's actions, but their support couldn't address the regulatory issues that would determine her future in the Marine Corps. The investigation that followed would examine not only Sarah's specific actions, but also broader questions about military leadership, civilian cooperation, and the balance between following procedures and achieving mission success. The outcome would determine whether the Marine Corps was ready to embrace different approaches to leadership and recognize that sometimes the gentlest methods could produce the strongest results. As Sarah awaited the final decision about her military future, she reflected on a career that had consistently challenged assumptions about strength, leadership, and what it meant to serve effectively in the modern military. Whether her gentle approach would be vindicated or punished remained to be seen. But 12 Marines were alive because someone had been willing to prove that unconventional wisdom could succeed where conventional approaches had failed. 2 years after the Coringal Valley rescue, Sarah Chun stood on the parade ground at Marine Corps Base Quantico, watching a graduation ceremony that would have been impossible to imagine when she was being dismissed as too gentle for real Marine operations. The graduates weren't traditional infantry Marines or reconnaissance specialists, but the first class of cultural operations leaders, a new military occupational specialty that Sarah had helped create. The ceremony represented the culmination of institutional changes that had rippled through every level of the Marine Corps. What began as one unauthorized rescue mission had evolved into a fundamental shift in how America's military approached modern warfare, civilian populations, and the complex human terrain that defined contemporary conflicts. General Patricia Morrison, the first woman to serve as Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, delivered the keynote address to families and dignitaries gathered for the historic graduation. Her presence at the ceremony carried special significance, as she had once been among Sarah's harshest critics during the combat leadership training that seemed like a lifetime ago. Today we recognize Marines who represent the future of military leadership, General Morrison announced to the assembled crowd. These graduates understand that modern warfare requires not just tactical competence, but cultural intelligence, relationship-building capabilities, and the wisdom to know when gentle approaches can achieve what aggressive tactics cannot. Sarah watched from the reviewing stand as 43 Marines received their new military occupational specialty designations, becoming the Marine Corps' first formally trained cultural operations leaders. Each graduate had completed 18 months of intensive training that combined traditional combat skills with anthropology, language studies, negotiation techniques, and fieldwork with civilian populations in contested areas. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, who had been among the Marines rescued from Bravo 2-1, approached the podium to address his fellow graduates. His presence represented the personal transformation that had occurred throughout the Marine Corps, as personnel who had witnessed Sarah's methods firsthand became advocates for expanding military capabilities beyond conventional approaches. 3 years ago, I was trapped in a valley in Afghanistan, convinced I was going to die because conventional military tactics couldn't save us, Webb told the audience. Staff Sergeant Chun proved that understanding people, building relationships, and thinking beyond traditional solutions could accomplish what heavy weapons and aggressive tactics could not. Today, we're graduating as Marines who can fight with rifles or with respect, who can dominate enemies or develop allies. The Cultural Operations Leaders Program had attracted Marines from every background and specialty, reflecting recognition that modern military effectiveness required diverse approaches to complex problems. Former infantry Marines learned ethnographic research methods, while intelligence specialists developed community engagement skills that enhanced their analytical capabilities. Captain Jennifer Santos, one of the program's first graduates, had recently returned from deployment to the Philippines, where her cultural operations team had successfully mediated disputes between local communities and insurgent groups without firing a single shot. Her methods, directly inspired by Sarah's approach, had achieved strategic objectives through patient relationship building rather than kinetic operations. The key insight from Sergeant Chun's work is that military strength includes the ability to understand different perspectives and find solutions that serve everyone's interests. Santos explained during a post-ceremony interview, "We're not abandoning combat capabilities. We're expanding our toolkit to include options that can prevent conflicts from requiring combat solutions." The success of cultural operations leaders in deployments around the world had attracted attention from allied militaries, with NATO partners requesting training exchanges in joint operations that could incorporate similar approaches. Sarah's gentle methods were being studied and adapted by military forces that recognized the limitations of purely kinetic approaches to complex security challenges. Colonel David Rahman, Abdul Rahman's son, who had joined the Marine Corps after immigrating to the United States, served as the program's deputy director. His appointment symbolized a transformation from viewing civilian populations as obstacles to recognizing them as potential partners in achieving security objectives. "My father risked his life to help Americans because he was treated with dignity and respect," Colonel Rahman reflected. Staff Sergeant Chun understood that building trust with civilian populations creates strategic advantages that can't be achieved through intimidation or force alone. Sarah's role had evolved from individual operator to institutional innovator, with her methods being incorporated into military doctrine, training curricula, and operational planning at the highest levels. The Pentagon had established a cultural operations directorate with Sarah serving as senior advisor for human terrain analysis, a position that allowed her to influence military thinking on a global scale. The transformation extended beyond formal programs to fundamental changes in how Marines approach leadership challenges. Boot camp training now included modules on cultural sensitivity and civilian interaction, while Officer Candidate School required coursework on anthropology and cross-cultural communication. Staff Sergeant Kin Torres, who had graduated from the Cultural Operations Leaders Program 6 months earlier, was preparing for deployment to West Africa, where her team would work with local governments to address root causes of extremist recruitment. Her mission objectives focused on economic development, educational opportunities, and community resilience rather than traditional combat operations. "We're still Marines, still capable of fighting when necessary," Torres explained. "But we've learned that preventing conflicts through understanding and cooperation is often more effective than winning them through superior firepower." The afternoon following the graduation ceremony, Sarah met with General Morrison for a private conversation that reflected how dramatically their professional relationship had changed since their first encounter during combat training years earlier. "Chun, I owe you an apology," Morrison began. "I was wrong to dismiss your approach as inappropriate for military leadership. Your methods haven't made us weaker. They've made us more capable of achieving our missions while protecting both American lives and civilian populations." Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement, but her focus remained on the future rather than past conflicts. "General, the real validation comes from seeing these Marines succeed in ways that traditional approaches couldn't achieve. We're proving that gentle methods can be strategically effective." The conversation turned to plans for expanding cultural operations capabilities throughout the military, with other service branches requesting similar programs, and the State Department exploring partnerships for diplomatic missions. Sarah's rescue operation had catalyzed changes that extended far beyond the Marine Corps'. As evening approached, Sarah walked across the Quantico parade ground, where she had once struggled to prove her worth to skeptical colleagues. The base that had once seemed to offer limited opportunities for someone deemed too gentle for combat operations had become the headquarters for revolutionary approaches to military effectiveness. The transformation was complete, but the work continued. Every day brought new challenges that required the kind of patient, thoughtful leadership that Sarah had developed throughout her career. The Marines she had trained were deploying to conflicts around the world, carrying with them the understanding that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the gentlest approach could achieve the most decisive results. 12 Marines had lived because someone was willing to prove that conventional wisdom didn't account for all the ways that military objectives could be achieved. Now thousands of Marines were learning that building relationships, understanding different perspectives, and approaching problems with empathy, rather than aggression, could enhance rather than compromise their effectiveness as warriors. The gentle revolution that began with one unauthorized rescue mission had transformed an entire institution, proving that sometimes the most profound changes began with someone willing to question assumptions about strength, leadership, and what it truly meant to serve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.